Hi, and welcome to So You Want to Be a Data Scientist podcast. If you're an aspiring data scientist yourself, don't forget to check the website. It is soyouwanttobeadatascientist.com. On the website, I share weekly articles and resources talking about what it is like to be a data scientist. I also share my insights about what to learn to become a data scientist efficiently. So don't forget to visit the website and subscribe for my weekly updates. Today I have Melissa Barr with me. She's a technical writer at Uber, and she's going to share her experience with us. So welcome, Melissa.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. So the first thing that I actually want to ask you is you're a technical writer, and can you talk a little bit about what a technical writer does?
Yeah, absolutely. So I know that not everyone knows or understands what a technical writer does. And for a long time, I didn't as well until I started as an intern and then full time being a technical writer at Uber. But at a high level, technical writers develop documentation for complex technical concepts. And then we surface them in a very simple and easy to understand context. So some of the documentation technical writers may create can include things such as runbooks, user guides, troubleshooting steps, how-to guides, and more. And typically, the documentation is still meant for a technical audience, but essentially, technical writers are helping to bridge that knowledge gap between the engineers who build the software to the engineers or customers that are using the software. And so sometimes technical writers may be dedicated to a specific team within a company, and then there they'll obtain extensive domain knowledge with that team. But other times they can be more fluid, meaning that they're bouncing around and they'll hold more breadth of knowledge rather than depth.
I see. And this documentation that you're preparing, is it for internal use, but also for outside use?
So specifically for me, it's all internal use. And I do work a little bit with open source as well, but the majority of it is internal. But not all tech writers are internal. I know that some tech writers at other companies work on external documentation as well.
I see. So you said you're working with open source projects. So is that like you go to a new open source project and then you help them with their documentation? Is that what happens?
It's more so if a team at Uber wants to open source their software, their technology, then
Mm-hmm.
I may work with them to create READMEs and the documentation needed to support the open source process.
I see. Okay, that's definitely really important, both internally because when someone prepares a piece of software and no one really knows how it works or how to troubleshoot, that becomes a big problem. But at the same time, also when you're becoming an open source or when you're making a project open source, then you really have to explain what is what. I definitely worked on projects, open source projects, where it was extremely hard to understand everything. So I really appreciate what you do, I have to say.
Yes,
So can you
exactly.
can you tell us a little bit about your background? How did you end up here? What did you do before? What did you study?
Yeah, so I did not expect to become a technical writer, and like I mentioned, I didn't know what a technical writer was for a while. So I went to college in the U.S. And I pursued two bachelors, one in business and the other one in computer science. But I've always been more social and was really thriving in a social business environment. But I also still love the math and solving complex problem side
Hmm.
of the engineering degree. And so I really wanted to challenge myself, and I went more towards the computer science degree. I leaned more into that one. And when I started to look for internships during college, it was clear that most students that were doing a CS degree went to be software engineers.
Hmm.
And while I knew I had the software skills to do that, I was still very people oriented and I wanted to be holding on to that more business side of it as well. And so I started to apply to data driven internships and I came across a technical writing one. And
Hmm.
at the time, I didn't expect that I would be qualified for it because, again, I wasn't sure what a technical writer was. I didn't know if I could do that. But as I went through the interview process, I realized that I was already doing a lot of this already. And they were asking me to send in technical writing samples. And I
Hmm.
sent them some coursework I had done for a computer science class I taught on campus at my college. And I
Hmm.
realized that I'd been doing this all along. I just didn't know it.
I see.
So, needless to say, I got the internship at my current company. And then at the end of my internship, I transitioned into a full time role. And I've now been at Uber full time for about 9 months now.
Oh, that's pretty cool. And when you were studying computer science and business, you said, right? Were you doing them at the same time?
I was, yep. So
Wow.
I did both at the same time, but it was actually nice because the computer science one was difficult and the business one came a little easier to me, which just gave me a little break in between
I
them.
see. Okay. Well, that's still pretty impressive, I have to say.
Thank you.
So for the decision then you made, you knew you wanted to work on a closer to technical area, but you also needed the more businessy side of it. Did I get that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay, so that's why you were like, okay, let me see what kind of opportunities that there are. And yeah, it's really interesting sometimes to see these positions that you never heard before, and then once you start getting to know it, and you're like, well, actually, this really sounds like I could enjoy doing this, right? So that's
Hmm.
definitely surprising. Okay, so well, I mean, you kind of gave the answer for this one to me, but so your background was in business and computer science, and basically, for your qualification for becoming a technical writer was something you already did, right? Or like, were there any other qualifications that you need to get a degree related to this, or an online course, or something related?
Yeah, so um, I think so again, yeah, my background was computer science and business, and I think that qualification and that combination of the two made me a good fit for technical writing, but
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say that there is a strict or specific background you need to be a technical writer.
Mm-hmm.
Many of my coworkers do have computer science degrees, but some do not as well. And I know some schools will offer a technical writing degree in itself. Not
Mm-hmm.
all schools do that. And so I think kind of the key here is not the specific degree needed, but you need to have um, enough technical and domain knowledge to really understand what's happening on the back end, how the code works, but
Yeah.
still also have good communication skills so that you can communicate it at a more high level and to non-engineers or engineers who are not familiar with the topic.
Uh, but so right now you're in the machine learning team, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so your domain is basically machine learning, and you have to know stuff about data science or machine learning, etc., in that area.
Yes, exactly.
And did you choose that specifically? Did you want to be in a data science C kind of team?
I didn't choose it specifically. I was kind of paired with the team during my internship, but it's one of
Mm-hmm.
the reasons that I stayed because I realized how interesting data is once I started working with the machine learning team
Mm-hmm.
and just the vast amount of things you can do with data and how extensive it is. And so when I started working with that team, I realized um, how much work needed to be done there and how much work there was to do and how interesting it was to me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I got more involved with that team and I stuck with that team when I converted to full time.
I see. So you didn't choose them, but you kind of not choosing to stay with them.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
and the reason is that you really enjoy seeing people working with data, and you're let's say impressed with the kind of things that are being done in those kind of teams.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so let's look back a little bit more of what you do every day. So if you had to explain it to someone or a friend, like, what do you do every day? What is it that you do once you arrive in the office?
Yeah. So most of my day revolves around tasks for the machine learning team, but I do work on tasks for the general tech writing team as well. So I can kind of give example of both of those, and the task can be both one-off tasks that may be specific to that day, or it'll be me continuing to work on a longer-term project. So a one-off task might be that let's say a small software change was made in the machine learning code. And I need to go in and update the documentation to update our example code or the instructions to reflect that change. So that's a quick, 30-minute update.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a data center has changed or service is deprecated, something small like that. But then I also have larger projects that are ongoing that may involve scoping out a project, identifying the problems, defining the solutions. And with that type of work, it's much more similar to almost a project management role because these larger projects are often for new features or tools that need to be released, and they'll need extensive support, troubleshooting docs, and runbooks to support them. And so these type of projects can take around 1 to 3 months end to end, depending on the size and complexity.
Mm-hmm.
And they often require me to be communicating with the team daily to stay updated, do follow ups, and really understand the ins and outs of the software. So day to day is me, kind of a combination of me working on those larger long-term projects and then attending to one-off tasks that kind of come up throughout the day.
But then you said sometimes there are changes and you have to track them out and then write them down and change them in documentation. But then how do you do that? Do you already know everything there is to know about this tool or software, or does someone tell it to you?
Yeah, that's probably the hardest part because not always. The team is big that I work with, and every time a change is made, they don't always have the time to update me because changes are made just constantly throughout the day. So the key here and the way that I typically tackle this is I'm very active with attending all of their team meetings. So I'm kind of always listening on what's happening, what's new, what's being changed, and I can kind of pick up these things myself. Sometimes the team will message me and let me know. And even sometimes, and this is great when this happens, that sometimes the team will update the documentation themselves.
Oh,
So
I
they
see.
make a change and they take it upon themselves to go update it. And
Hmm,
the
hmm.
team is really good about doing that as well if it's a quick fix.
And I'm guessing while you're preparing this documentation, also you're working with the people who develop the product.
Correct. Yeah, we work side by side.
I'm assuming then you have a lot of meetings to do, or you most of your job should be people facing, right? It's not just you typing, but like maybe being in meetings and having people explain to you what there is or what there is now or what people should do.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of it is people facing, and we may get engaged pretty early on. So it's not always when a product is finished and about to launch that we will then jump in. A lot of times, and specifically with the team I work with, I'll get involved when the project is still being when the project is still abstract and it's still being scoped out, they'll still involve me. And so I can kind of work with the documentation along the way versus just jumping in at the end.
Mhm.
And so that leads to a lot of meetings
Yeah.
and chatting one on one with the team very often.
Yeah, but it is also, yeah, it's really fascinating to me because even when I have to write some sort of documentation or even just explanation about something that I developed, it's really hard to put it on words, and also trying to explain it to someone and like make sure that they understand, and and then that someone really understands and then writes it down in a way that other people can use the tool. It's yeah, it's really fascinating.
Yeah, exactly. That's why we have technical writers.
So I forgot to ask, were there like any specific trainings that you took, or are they like standards that all technical writers follow, or maybe company-wide standards?
Um, yeah, that's a good question. So as far as external trainings, no. Um, but internally, we do a few things to support this. So our team does teach a technical writing course or technical writing training to all engineers that enter the company. And that's
Mm.
just because our team isn't big enough to scale for, like, we're not one technical writer for every engineer. So we have to be able to spread the knowledge we have so that all engineers can kind of have this knowledge already without needing to work one-on-one with us. And so we do that through doing trainings when engineers onboard and also just whenever they need them throughout the year. And then for the standards, while sometimes we will follow general external standards if they're widely used. For example, Google has some developer documentation best practices that are widely used.
Hmm.
But since we do have our own team at Uber, we've created our own internal standards that we follow.
Hmm.
So we have like an internal style guide and an internal documentation best practices that we recommend for everyone in the company.
Sure. Yeah, because you said sometimes engineers go ahead and fix the problems or changes in the documentation. If everyone
Mm-hmm.
starts writing what they think, it might get
Yes,
chaotic really fast.
exactly.
So you already mentioned this a little bit before, but I want to make sure that we're clear on this. Are you part of a bigger team, or I just want to know how this team is structured? Are there engineers, or are you part of a team that are like technical writers, or are you separated into sub teams in terms of like your area or your industry, for example?
Yeah, good question. And this, I can speak to what my specific team is, but I know that this is not the case for all technical writers in the
Sure.
world. But my specific team, I am a part of a bigger technical writing team. and we're held within the data and engineering org. And being a part of a bigger team is great because different coworkers on my team are all experts in different areas of the company. So we're able to use each other as resources when we need help,
Hmm.
which has proven to be a really big advantage. So some of us may be uh, paired with a engineering team, and such as I am with the machine learning team, and work really closely with them. But then we also do have, projects that we would work on together, and we will come back and work as a technical writing team together on more general projects as well.
So that sounds cool. Melissa, I was wondering then, so you're a technical writer now, and you said you started around 9 months ago. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And just for the peeps out there who are interested in a technical writing career, what are the next steps in your career as a technical writer? Where do you get from here?
Yeah. So right now, I mean, I started as an intern, and then I converted to a full-time technical writer. And from there, you can go to a more senior level of technical writer. You could also become, a technical writing manager. Our team works really closely with the technical learning team at our company, which does a lot of trainings and engineering learning resources. So that's kind of one of our partner teams. Um, but I think that there's a lot of places you can go from here because this type of knowledge is needed in almost any type of engineering role that you would want to be
Hmm.
a part of. So if you want, I know a lot of the work that we do is almost like a project manager, as we kind of are guiding engineering teams through the documentation process as they are
Hmm.
completing a project. So I know technical writers that have gone on to be project managers, some that have gone back to software engineering if they want to go back to that side.
Hmm.
So I think that there are really a lot of options when you're a technical writer of where to go from there.
Yeah, that also sounds to me like that you can easily become a manager, especially a product manager, because you're on top of everything. But at the same time, you
Yeah.
can easily go back to a more technical role because, again, you're on top of everything and you're talking to everyone and you're aware how everything works together. And that's basically the most important knowledge.
Yeah, it's really great to have that knowledge, and when you're a technical writer, you learn so much across the entire company, and
Hmm.
so then transitioning to a project management role is much easier because you already, like you just mentioned, you already know how all these services are working together and
Hmm.
how they're being leveraged and how they can be improved.
Yeah, I can even see someone going to being an architect from there, for example,
Yeah,
because you have such a good view of how everything works. So,
definitely.
one more question about what you do every day. So, are you typically responsible for a whole project or like small parts of a project?
It depends. I would say both. Sometimes, if it's if it's a new feature that comes out and it's maybe like 2 months worth of work, then we'll be in charge of the whole project end to end, scoping it, defining what the audience is going to be, and so on. And but if it's an even bigger project than that, for example, it might be a whole new product being launched that, and maybe the product has taken 2 years to develop, then we
Hmm.
may have multiple technical writers supporting that team, and they'll work together and break up the work so that it's not as much work for one person.
I see. Yeah, that definitely sounds hard to be following a project for a couple of years.
Yeah.
So this is my next question is more about the general team that you're working in. So like more like the machine learning team. But I'm sure you're aware of this. So what kind of projects do you guys work on? So I know you can't go on project details because I'm sure it's confidential at every company. But I'm just mostly curious about the general idea of how does it work in the team? How do you come up with projects? Who comes up with projects? Are there other teams coming to your team saying, hey guys, we need a data science solution here? Or yeah, how does that process work?
Yeah, so I'll share a little bit about how projects work on both the machine learning team and the technical writing team, because I think
Mm-hmm.
they're a little bit different. Um, for the machine learning team, the machine learning team has their own project managers for the whole team, and those project managers are the ones that are triaging requests and identifying which projects the team is going to work on. And from there, once the team has identified a project that they're going to work on, and they start doing the development, then that's the point that I'll get engaged and start thinking about how are we going to support customers during this time, what do customers need to know to use this new tool, and I'll start working with them one-on-one through that. As to how they get those projects, they can either be something that the manager is just seeing as a customer need. They can be a customer ask. Oftentimes, since a lot of engineers are using the machine learning platform, they may want a specific feature that we don't have, and they'll try and create it themselves. And so when we see that happen, then the machine learning team may jump in and just create it for them. So that's happened before as well. But on the technical writing side, projects that we work on together are more focused on the way that general documentation is generated, accessed, and used within the company. And so we will work together on projects that help scale documentation across the company.
And what do you mean exactly by scaling documentation across the company?
So in other words, in the way that documentation is held. So if we hold our documentation in repo, if we hold it in a different type of editor, and how engineers are accessing that documentation, how easy it is to search for it, because we want to make sure that if they're going to search for something, they're going to get what the first result is what they need. And so we partner with other teams, other engineering teams, which help define those search and documentation, the homes for the documentation.
So making it accessible so that they can access it when they need it.
Exactly.
Yeah, I know it sounds really simple, these kind of things, but then when you actually try to do it in a big organization, it's always extremely hard. So okay, let's talk a little bit about how you feel about your job. So can you tell me what the most exciting thing about your job is?
Yeah, most exciting. So I think I have two things I would say that's most exciting. The first one is more focused to the machine learning work I do, and I think the most exciting thing there is that I get to firsthand see the results, the progress, and the benefits that come out of the work that we're doing. And so seeing firsthand when our models predict something extremely accurately, and then that in turn helps the company, is very exciting, because then I know that I was a part of that. But then the second one that I would say, and this is more general to all technical writers, I think across across any company, is when we see a large decrease in support time. So in other words, support chat rooms or help chat rooms for a service or product can be flooded with questions before a technical writer goes in and helps that team. And then afterward, the chat rooms can be nearly empty because all the questions have already been answered in the documentation. And so then not only do you know that you did your job well, but you did it so well that all these engineers who are originally spending half the day answering questions in this help chat room don't know what to do with all their extra time now. And so that, I wouldn't say that happens every time, but when it does, that's very exciting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I never thought about that, but that's true. If you do your job really well, then you're opening up a lot of support people, and there is a chance that you actually see the results. Because if you ask me, I'll be like, okay, but how does the technical writer see results? Well, that's how.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we talked about the things that make you excited about your job, and what about the most boring part of your job?
So something so something that's more boring or maybe more tedious as a technical writer is just keeping everything up to date. And again, I think this is one of those universal things for all technical writers, because it can be really tiring whenever a code change is made that you have to then go and update the documentation to reflect that change. It's not the most exciting task to do over and over again, but you have to always it's important, and you have to be alert and always listening and engaged to the teams that you work with, so that you know when changes need to be made. So specifically for me, this can happen multiple times per day. And since the documentation I work with is generated in repo, it's a very tedious process to update it so often. So that would be one of the more tedious processes as a technical writer.
But then after you prepare a piece of documentation, are you always going to be the one who's responsible from it?
Yeah, so that's a really good question as well. Not The answer is not always, and we usually hope no, because it's just not scalable for every documentation piece we create to then have to constantly be owning it and making sure that it's 100% up to date. So this is where the other engineers come in, and where the responsibility is really across the whole engineering org to be diligent about this versus just the technical writing team. And so we try our best, and especially if we're dedicated to a specific team, I'll be definitely more diligent with the documentation for that specific team. But again, once something is created, no, the short answer is no. We don't always, we're not always tied to it and making sure that we're owning that long term. We make sure to find an owner closer to the team.
I see. Okay. So you still assign it to a certain person whose responsibility it is to make sure that everything is in order.
Yes, most of the time it'll go back to the team
Mhm.
unless we're actively working with that team every day.
Well, that sounds good, but I definitely understand why it's a little bit tedious to try to be on top of everything, especially during the
Yes.
development process. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the culture. So you're a technical writer and you're in a more of a technical team. And I'm sure everyone observes this. I wish it wasn't the case, but what happens is there are a lot of guys in technical teams. I wanted
Mm-hmm.
to ask your opinion. Did you encounter any bias, positive or negative, actually? I had some female colleagues telling me that they actually get more attention and people are impressed when they do something well more than they are when some other guy does it well. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on this and your experience. Have you experienced anything negative or some difference of how people treat you because you're a woman?
So, as a female, you're right. I'm definitely in the minority, but I don't feel that I encounter any bias at work. In college, I would say it was a little bit different. Being one of the few females in the computer science
Mm-hmm.
program, but right now I'm the only tech writer working with the machine learning team, and all of their needs and asks go through me. So I'm able to interact with so many people on the team, and they've all been really great. And so I have not encountered any bias. But like I said, I've I've gotten more used to being at the minority at this point. When I first started college as a computer science major, I was really shocked at the difference. I was so surprised. I did not know until I stepped into my first like CS 101 class, and I was just so surprised. And later on in college, I started teaching that course, and
Uh-huh.
even then, teaching it and standing in front, I was just shocked by the difference. But
Yeah.
at this point, working on having worked on the engineering team for a while at a big tech company, I'm a little more used to it. It feels normal to me now.
Yeah, I mean, we get used to it, and I feel like also the tide is kind of like turning a little bit. Now we're getting
Yes.
more and more women in the teams, so that's always nice to see.
Yeah, it's great to see.
Okay, so my final question is actually asking for advice. Do you have anything you want an aspiring technical writer or someone who wants to get into a data career to hear?
Yeah, definitely. So I think I have three main pieces of advice for this. So the first one I would say is to really understand the power of data. Data can transform, just about anything. And I know that you definitely understand this, but for me, I didn't realize how powerful it can be until I got into the machine learning space and saw firsthand how impactful data visualization and model predictions can be. So understanding that off the bat, I think can really help you in how you choose to use it in a data career.
Hmm.
The second one is to explore your options. And I know this podcast is titled "So You Want to Be a Data Scientist," but there are many careers in data,
Hmm.
and so many of which that I haven't heard of, or that many people may have not heard of. So exploring your options and finding the perfect fit for you, I think is definitely worth trying, as there's so many different ways you can go in data. And then the third one is just to work hard and um, believe in yourself. And I know that sounds cliche, but aspiring for a career in data is great, but making it there is another thing. And so if you're working towards a career in data right now and you're aspiring to be a technical writer or having a career in data, I would say just work hard and really believe that you will get there, because don't let yourself give up due to discouragement, because discouragement will happen, but pushing yourself and continuing to work hard through that will get you there.
Wow, that's really that's great advice, Melissa. I definitely agree about all of your points, especially the second one. I know the podcast is called "So You Want to Be a Data Scientist," but at the same time, I'm trying to encourage people to consider all of the options, because what I see also is people start a data science career and then they realize, wait a minute, this is not what I actually wanted. Maybe they wanted to be a product analyst or they wanted to be a
Hmm.
machine learning engineer. They were just not aware of it. But yeah,
Exactly.
so that's really great. And I also agree with your consistency point. Definitely, you really have to just keep showing up. There's a lot of discouraging information out there on the internet. I see sometimes people are like, you can never be a data scientist. I call them the data science elitists. They just
I like
think
that.
yeah, there are some people who just seem to think that unless you are magically born with data science or any kind of data skills, then you are doomed. You can never be one. But I definitely don't agree with that. And as you said, you just need to be consistent and keep showing up, keep studying, and keep learning. And you'll get there if you want enough, basically. Uh,
Exactly.
so that's great, Melissa. That's all I wanted to ask you today. So thanks again for being here today, and talk to you soon.
Thank you.